what's up? How are you? I'm doing good, good. You just got out of class?
Yeah, Native history in Minnesota.
Okay. I've learned about it in some other classes, all the injustices and war they've been through, but it's sad, really sad. Unfortunately, nobody can do anything about it.
Well, we can't change the past, but there are things we can do today to promote justice for Native groups in Minnesota.
The fight for Indigenous rights fits into a larger struggle for social justice. Social justice is the upholding of the natural law that all persons, irrespective of ethnic origin, gender, possessions, race, religion, etc., are to be treated with equity and without prejudice. The path to justice for American Indians in Minnesota starts with recognizing the implications that these historical events have on relations between Native and non-Native communities. Things like the Dakota War and the dispossession of White Earth are part of a colonialist system that damages Native sovereignty and identity. Since the past can't be undone, a logical thing to consider is restorative justice. Restorative justice is a different approach to justice that focuses on healing relationships between victims, survivors, offenders, and everyone in the community. Justice doesn't need to be a punishment to settler society for past wrongs. Part of the restorative justice movement involves reclaiming land. Many groups already exist that are working towards returning land. There are local organizations like the White Earth Land Recovery Project and worldwide initiatives like the Sacred Land Project. Another part of restorative justice is healing relationships between communities by fighting racist depictions of Native people. In 1995, 2 students at Cass Lake Bena High School in Minnesota began a movement to remove squaw from place names in the state, and eventually they were successful in convincing the Minnesota State Legislature that this should be done. There's also inspiring action being taken to assert Native sovereignty. When the U.S. government made treaties with Native American groups throughout history, it inherently recognized each tribe as an independent nation. Now individuals from Dakota and Ojibwe communities actively challenge the limits of their sovereignty by contesting federal and state laws that conflict with agreements made in early treaties, such as the right to hunt and fish on land ceded to the U.S. Environmental restoration could also be a big part of actively restoring justice to both Dakota and Ojibwe people in Minnesota. The traditional values in both Dakota and Ojibwe communities promote respect for nature and call for proper use of its resources. In a way, taking the time and initiative to restore and protect Minnesota's natural resources could help heal Dakota and Ojibwe communities from the injustice and mistreatment they've faced in their history with the state of Minnesota, as we all work for a sustainable and equitable future.
Just because I have no wish to murder you before the eyes of your daughter does not mean that I'm waiting for a remedy.
To make real progress towards justice for all Native groups, the government and settler society should acknowledge the autonomy and sovereignty of Indigenous peoples, but we should aspire to move beyond that. We need to recognize and renounce the remnants of the colonialist ideas that this nation was founded upon, like manifest destiny and the doctrine of discovery. It's important that we've been informed about these events and injustices that have occurred in Minnesota history, but we need to move beyond accumulating knowledge and simple apologies in order to achieve social justice.
An apology is a great start to continuing conversation. Let's acknowledge the problem. Let's make room for community dialogue. Let's move towards respect and justice for Native people in Minnesota.
Let's get off this bench, let's do something.
The Random House Dictionary provides the following definition of apology: a written or spoken expression of one's regret, remorse, or sorrow for having insulted, failed, injured, or wronged another.
It is beyond a doubt that the state of Minnesota has insulted, failed, injured, and wronged its original inhabitants. So, where is this expression of regret?
It's high time that the government of Minnesota issued a formal apology to the Native peoples of the land for the crimes and injustices committed against them throughout our state's history. But what good would an apology do?
In this context, an apology is more than just an I'm sorry. By issuing an apology, the state itself is acknowledging that it did wrong, as well as expressing regret. It's a rare occurrence for any governing body to admit publicly to wrongdoing. Thus, the importance of a state-issued formal apology would not be lost on the citizens of Minnesota.
The state would set an example for all of its citizens in both acknowledging our history and expressing a sense of remorse, and moving forward to promote healthier relationships with Indigenous communities.
It's important to remember that an apology is just that, an apology. By itself, it is not a promise for reparations or a better future. A simple apology on its own doesn't really fix anything.
An apology has to be heartfelt and supported by action to be worth anything.
It's difficult for Americans to imagine their country as founded on anything other than freedom. It's even more difficult to acknowledge that the land was founded by forcefully depriving people of their freedom. But if Minnesota wants to move a step forward, non-natives would have to be prepared to face the guilt.
Even more importantly, an apology has to be a foundation and not a monument. A foundation like the foundations in this bridge are the framework for something to be built on. It's meant to become something bigger and better in the future. An apology like this would act as the beginnings to improve knowledge and life between Minnesota and its native people.
Minnesota is a land teeming with natural resources. Settlers made a good living farming the land they took from Ojibwe and Dakota people, and continue doing so today.
Meanwhile, the Native Americans were exiled and sent to barren reservations. To this day, despite casino profits, the poverty rates run high on reservations, along with alcohol and substance abuse. Clearly, settlers have profited at the expense of Native Minnesotans. Not only have settlers profited, but they have actively persecuted the Native people.
If we want to begin to serve some justice, we can start by realizing that we are obliged to take action. The citizens of Minnesota work and live on land that was swindled or forcefully taken from American Indians. A truly just action would be to return all of that land.
However, that's not just to the people who have grown up in Minnesota and know no other home. The most basic obligation we can fulfill for some part of justice is to learn the truth about the state's history and take action towards an improved future. An apology is a form of truth-telling because one can't express regret properly without admitting to wrong.
In 2010, the Department of Defense Appropriations Bill was passed. Included in the bill was a formal apology by the United States. It stated, "The United States, acting through Congress, apologizes on behalf of the people of the United States for the many instances of violence, maltreatment, and neglect inflicted on Native people by citizens of the United States and expresses its regret."
20 years earlier, in 1990, the U.S. Congress issued an apology, an expression of deep regret, for the massacre at Wounded Knee. During the massacre, hundreds of Lakota people were killed by U.S. cavalry on a reservation in South Dakota on December 29, 1890. Congress does not represent the United States as a whole, however. Furthermore, they did not grant the wishes of the Lakota people to make Wounded Knee a memorial site.
Both of these apologies were the same in that they did not have a large or long-lasting impact. The lack of impact also tends to send a message of apathy or lack of feeling in the apology. The first apology in the Defense Appropriations Bill was not publicly announced by the government or the president. The statement was indeed printed in a bill that is viewable by the public, but the average person does not go out of his or her way to read through every bill passed. A proper apology must be done publicly, most likely in the form of a speech and broadcast so that as many people can hear it.
As discussed earlier, an apology must incite action. Neither of the government's previous apologies promised or led to better relations with American Indians. In fact, the congressional apology for the Wounded Knee massacre specifically denied the memorial site requested. By granting the request for a memorial site, Congress should show willingness to move forward and improve relations with American Indians.
To make a difference, all Americans have to be open and willing. The apology must also inspire the citizens. and hopefully help the state move past its collective guilt. But what about after that? This entire country lies on land that was once inhabited by Native American people, and Minnesota is not the only state guilty of committing terrible acts in order to secure its territories.
Ojibwe and Dakota peoples are not the only ones whom the U.S. government owes an apology to.
In 2009, 7 senators wrote to President Obama asking him to publicly announce the apology to all Native peoples that was printed in the Defense Appropriations Bill. So far, he has not.
A formal apology issued by the President of the United States would be the greatest step forward in improving relations with the Native Americans and beginning discussions on how to best achieve social justice. Furthermore, this may prompt other state governments to apologize to the relevant tribes within their borders. Or, inversely, the act of the Minnesota government apologizing may prompt a similar act on the part of the federal government.
We hope that after viewing this film, you have a greater understanding of the Native presence in Minnesota's past, present, and future. When you wander the streets of Minneapolis, explore the forests of Minnesota's North Woods, or enjoy the cool waters of the state's lakes and rivers, you should remember that they are the roots of the cultures of the Dakota and Ojibwe, and that those people are still here today. It is time to take responsibility for the injustices done unto the Native peoples of the place now known as Minnesota. We need to work together for a better future for all Minnesotans.
My name is Mindy Myers.
My name is Henry Rodman.
My name is Brandon Zenda.
McKenna Habiger. Mackenzie Patel.
My name is Sarah Lutz.
My name is Nikki Price.
Zachary Beach.
My name is Jennifer Hall.
It is time for Minnesota
to take responsibility.
Take responsibility for its actions.
I would like to express my support
for the Native community of Minnesota by apologizing.
By apologizing.
Apologizing.
By apologizing for the injustices
done
within the state of Minnesota.